Well, hello there, and welcome to this episode of the Wellness Collective. We're going to dive in a little bit to teen health. I had one lovely Instagram follower reach out and ask the question if I could talk a little bit more about teen health. And I'm like, yeah, sure, I would love to. Funny thing then happened. I had another good friend of mine also reach out on Instagram and said, Nat, didn't you write a book about this? And I'm like, yes, I did. But time flies when you're having fun, right? And just a little bit of backstory on Beautiful You. I wrote Beautiful You 2000 and I want to say 19. I think that's when we launched it, or 2020. Yeah, start of 2020 maybe. And it was a very interesting experience because I understand that a teenager isn't going into the bookstore to buy a book about their health, and especially their reproductive and gynecological health. But I knew that the mother would be. And so from a marketing perspective, that was pretty interesting. We hit a lot of brick walls with Beautiful You. It was difficult to position in a bookstore because there's no category for teen health. So that was the first thing that was very apparent. And also just the general resistance to talking about women's health to young girls was quite interesting. I remember a situation or a conversation I was having with a mother, and she said this book should be in the curriculum. And of course I said, I don't disagree with you. I think it should absolutely be in the curriculum. That was actually, I wrote Beautiful You for the 14-year-old me. I wrote Beautiful You to answer the questions that I wish I knew when I was 14. And I said to her, that is actually, I wrote the book with that in mind. I had a big vision for Beautiful You to really become a real resource and a real Bible for women's health, or foundational information for women's health. And I said to her, I would love that. Like, do you have any suggestions? And she said, oh, well, look, I think it's a great idea, but my children are at Catholic schools and there's just no way that this would be something that we could use. And I said, oh, right. Is somebody that has a Catholic faith's anatomy different to everybody else's anatomy? Because I'm pretty sure that when we're talking about our health, our reproductive health, our endocrine system, our genitalia, like, I'm pretty sure it's all the same. And she had a bit of a giggle, and we realised how ridiculous the system itself was. Now, we're not going to talk about the education system here today because I don't want to talk about that. I don't know where that would go. But I do want to talk about or touch on some areas today when it comes to young women's health. What I did was actually, just so you understand, I, of course, did what every smart person does and takes it to Instagram and asked for you to tell me what you wanted me to talk about. Because I think I know, but sometimes there's other things that maybe you've got questions around. So thank you to everybody who did respond to that, and I'm going to try and touch on some of those in this episode. Yeah, let's talk about it from the beginning, because I think where we go wrong is that we aren't having appropriate conversations with our young little people when they're asking the right questions. Now, I believe that kids are always asking the right questions for them to learn what they need at the time. It can be uncomfortable for us as adults to answer those questions like, hi, mummy, where did I come from? We've come up with every different answer, from the stork brought you. Imagine that. Imagine flying through the air in the beak of a bird and then being put on a doorstep. Like, no wonder we're confused. Or we've been told the doctor put you there, which might not be untrue. There is, obviously, if you've been down the path of assisted conception, that can be true. But fundamentally, what we can be saying to our children is that mum has eggs and dad has sperm, and when they meet, that is called conception, and that's when the first sign of, or the first part of, a baby is created. And just allow that conversation to be just an evolution over time. And I think what that really does is it takes the mystical element of especially women's health, but this is for boys and girls really. It takes that mystery out of it. It becomes something no different to how giraffes mate or reptiles or whatever. We are no different in the sense of there's actually a process that happens. Kids don't care about the intimacy that it takes place for conception to happen. They just want the facts. And if they're asking the questions about then what happens, then they're ready to hear that. And we just need to be constantly, I think, thinking about how can I deliver this to my child in a way that's age appropriate. So we don't need to hide it is the first thing I would say. And I don't know that I even did a great job of this with my children when they were really little. But once I started thinking about it, I would say from maybe the age of 6 when I really started being more curious around why are we like this, I started to do that. And it's never been an issue. And I haven't even really needed to sit them down and have conversations. It's just been an ongoing conversation over many years. So let's take the fear out of that is the first thing that I would say. The second thing then comes to the time where we start to see changes in we're going to talk about women. We're going to talk about, I'm not an expert in men's health or puberty for boys, so I'm going to leave that to the experts there. But when it comes to young girls or young women, there's obviously changes that happen. And it's very normal. I have a lot of you that have even in these questions that you've asked freaking out about their 10-year-old that's got breast buds and probably buying into a lot of the information that you're seeing on Instagram or reading about early puberty. And that's another whole conversation. And if you do feel like your child is experiencing precocious puberty, there's so much that can be done for that. And you can also check out some resources on my website as well where I've written an article about precocious puberty. In fact, of course, we'll include that in the show notes. It is very normal for us to start to see changes somewhere, I would say, around the age of 10, where the breast buds, you'll see them come and go for a little while. And it's not really until the breast buds are there and they're consistently there that we typically see a period a year later. Now, the average age when we were growing up for children to get their period or young women to get their period was 13. Nowadays, the average age is 11. I want to say I haven't seen that, anecdotally haven't seen that. I am seeing maybe slightly earlier, but I really am still seeing a lot of children or young girls get their period at around the age of 12 to 13. There's nothing that means that's going to be an issue necessarily. It's nothing to panic about. Unless it's very early, obviously, then there's other challenges that, obviously more like social challenges, but it doesn't tend to be a long-term health issue. This is what we normally see, and it can be really tricky if we haven't laid that foundational piece and we haven't had these conversations with our teenagers, our young women and our children. It can be quite confronting. So I think just having that conversation helps to take that kind of edge off things and allow it to sort of roll in a way that I think that probably it used to. Like once upon a time, if you think about it, there were a bunch of women sitting around preparing food, looking after houses. They were all together and the men were out hunting and everyone was talking about everyone's health challenges or not even, whatever it was. But I think that we've really disconnected from that part of ourselves. So let's get back to that, I want to say. So then, of course, just like perimenopause, puberty, the hormones are temperamental. They're not robust. They're not necessarily balanced. And our hormones don't mature as women until around the age of 21. So if this is the only thing you hear me say, it's very normal for young girls to have somewhat irregular periods. Their whole axis between the brain and the reproductive organs is just establishing itself. It's just finding its groove, and it's temperamental. Now, because it's temperamental, it can mean that small things can have an impact on it, like over-exercising. And I mean, that can happen for anyone, but especially for young girls. Not enough food, trauma, environment, poor diet, all of these things can really impact these changing hormones. So we want to be mindful of anything that could be affecting that somewhat and not really allowing it to kind of just find its rhythm and pattern over that time. So it's not uncommon to see that, and we shouldn't panic. We should use that information. I can't tell you the number of you who are panicked by the teenager in my DMs. It's quite interesting. So let's have a look at some of these questions. So I want to try and go in the line of what people have asked. We've talked about breast buds. We've talked about the progression. And a lot of you have also said, I just want to have the right information for my young woman, teenager. We are really trying to republish Beautiful You, by the way, I think, but you can get it as a online resource on Kindle or as an ebook. So that could be an option until we do that. So we can see that the hormones can be temperamental, especially as the onset of puberty happens, and then in those years right up until, our early 20s. And this often sees challenges with skin. We see that presented in, ways of acne or even things like psoriasis, eczema, reddening of the skin. You can see all sorts of changes. So that can be a challenge. And then also the other thing that we can have challenges with, not only the actual period itself, but also the impact that has on girls socially and also their mental health as well. These are all things that it doesn't change just because you're a teenager or you're in your peak years of fertility or you're coming down the other side in perimenopause and menopause. Every single phase and stage still needs some attention and some care. And I guess this is the hardest because it's the first time. It's the first time we've actually had our cycles. It's the first time we've had to pay attention to how we're feeling. It's the first time we might have had aches and pains that we didn't know that we had before. But what doesn't change are the influences and how that impacts hormones. It's just like I said, the way in which our hormones are more temperamental at that time, that's what changes. But the feeders that take either our hormones offline or imbalance our hormones don't change. That's these things: stress, lifestyle, nutrition, the things I just mentioned. That doesn't change at any age or phase. That's the same right across. So it's more about how do we actually have this awareness that we need to be a little bit more meticulous in taking care of ourselves in puberty and in perimenopause. You can get away with a lot more in our peak fertile years because things are more robust. They're more solid. There's an abundance of everything that we need. But when we're talking about puberty, we're coming kind of like up into this next phase of our peak fertile years. We spend time in our peak fertile years, and then down the other side of it, we start to come out of it. And so you can see at each phase, if you think about that as almost like a pyramid or a mountain, you can see, and that gives you a good visual as to what you really need to be doing. A lot of women will say, how do I get my teenager to eat better, to sleep more, to be nicer, to basically do all the things that they're probably not doing and in your opinion is wrong? The truth is you can't. You cannot force someone to do anything without it having a consequence. But what we can do is, first and foremost, we must be the example of what we want our children to be. And so a lot of the work that needs to happen to support our teenagers or our children in general, but especially our teenagers, is our work, is how are we showing up for ourselves as parents? How am I taking care of myself? Because I am the example. And what you're doing in this example that you're being is you're creating a home base. You're creating a foundation. And this becomes their normal. So if you are eating poorly, you're not exercising, you're not moving your body, you're not taking care of yourself, you're not prioritizing your sleep, you're saying every month, oh my gosh, my period's due. I hate this time of the month. If you're constantly putting out there what you don't want to happen, they're just going to feed off that. You are literally creating the scenario you don't want. So that can be a little bit confronting to hear, but the work is actually with us as parents, and kids will generally follow what they see. And it's never too late. I don't think it's ever too late, but it's about the consistency and this home base or foundation that we create that kids see us doing. It doesn't mean that they will start doing it immediately. It doesn't mean that they will start doing it in a month. They may never do it whilst they live at home. But in creating this foundation and creating it in a way that it's not pushy, it's not forceful, it just is what you do, it feels safe to them. This becomes something that's safe, and we return to what we know. So I really would encourage you that if you are not living your best life as a parent, it's time to start to think about that. And can you see now that this is, because we are all still, no matter how hard we try, we are all still underlying, having every now and again mother guilt, thinking that we have to put everybody in front of us and that we'll just mop up we'll have whatever the dregs are left in the bottom. No, we cannot do that, because the why is now big enough to put ourselves first. The why I need to put myself first is because I want my children to have a healthy, happy example so that they can live their best life. Perfect, right? Because we take the focus off ourselves. So I would really, really encourage you to start to think about this, to start to think about the words that you're saying, start to think about the actions, start to think about how you are living your life as an example for your children. I grew up in a household where health food was abundant, to the point where I used to roll my eyes and be like, oh my gosh, Mum, you are so embarrassing. When we'd have birthday parties, my mum would go to great lengths to make the most amazing food, all from scratch, and it was all so healthy. And all I ever wanted was the chocolate cake with the sprinkles on top and a bowl of chips and a bowl of lollies. But that never happened. I used to really be somewhat embarrassed by that. And it can feel embarrassing as kids, obviously. As time went on, Mum got a little bit more flexible, but she's always been the most incredible example of health, and still is to this day. She's meticulous with her health. When I got to be a teenager, obviously you have more freedom. You have the ability to buy things on your own time, with your own money, without someone watching you, telling you, is that a good decision or not? And so as any teenager, and it is a little bit of a rite of passage, as you do, you go and live your best life. You start to eat things that you know that are not Carol, my mum's name's Carol, they're not Carol approved. And so I started doing that, and of course what happens? Your skin starts to break out. You start to experience period pain you've never had before. Your body starts to give you the feedback that it doesn't like what you're doing. And so really with, this is a side note, and I will return to this, it's using those moments where we get that feedback. And now what I do is I make Olivia aware of that. But let's talk about that in a second. Let me finish telling my story. So when I was 18, I did what all country girls do, and I moved away to go to university, and I moved away from home, and I moved away from what I knew, and that was really hard. But one thing I did was, I would like to say that almost every single day for a year, I would have a Kentucky Fried Chicken Zinger burger for lunch, because I could, because there was no one telling me otherwise. And you know what happened? And it wasn't just the Kentucky Fried Chicken burger. It was the burning the candle at both ends. It was probably eating a lot of chocolate. I could do whatever I wanted. There was no one there telling me what to do. It was like fantastic. I was just loving myself. But was I loving myself? Because I developed severe period pain, to the point where it would say that, what is it? It's a long time ago, 28 years later, more than. I would say it was probably undiagnosed endometriosis. I would be passing out on the floor from the pain. I would vomit. I would remember pushing my face up against the tiles of the cold bathroom floor to kind of bring me back to life. Like, the pain was excruciating 10 out of 10. Like, I know what that feels like, and it was awful. And I remember one day looking in the mirror and not liking what I saw. It had nothing to do with my period, by the way. I didn't like what I saw. I was what I would consider, I was uncomfortable. I was overweight for my height. And I just wasn't healthy. My skin was terrible, and my periods were terrible. And so I remember thinking to myself, I just got to get a bit healthier. This doesn't feel good. And my knowledge of health at the time was quite limited. I was studying health at school. I wasn't yet studying Chinese medicine. So I set out on a path to do two things. One, I started exercising. And two, I adjusted my diet. I stopped eating Zinger burgers for lunch. I switched out a Zinger burger, and this is the 19-year-old me, and I thought, a salad roll is going to be better than a Zinger burger. I thought the salad roll was healthy. And it's not that the salad roll is not healthy, but, the ingredients might be questionable. The bread might be questionable. The margarine in it is definitely questionable. Do you know margarine's one molecule away from plastic? Terrible. If you're eating margarine, it's the only thing you hear today, please stop. There were things, and processed. There was probably some processed meat in there as well. Anyway, but something happened. My periods got better. My skin got better. I lost weight. I started to feel better. And I kept adding in these little 1% changes. And you know what I realized many years later? It was the home base that my mum had provided that I made my way back to, because I knew that innately, but also probably as a learnt behaviour, I knew that that's what I needed to do. I intuitively knew that's what I needed to do because that's what I'd been shown. And so for those of you who are out there going, what supplement? Which thing do what's going to fix this? Like, I need to know the one thing. The one thing is you. The one thing is what you are doing to look after yourself, to have that flow-on effect for your children. And I can't stress that enough. Children are a carbon copy of their parents most of the time. I've seen that time and time again. So we start with ourselves. We set up a home base. We understand that kids are going to go and be kids. That's the first thing we need to do. And depending on the personality of your child, sometimes telling them that they have to do something is the worst thing that you can do. I know with Geordie, if he says to me, I don't want to go to school today, and I say to him, no, you have to go to school today, mate, come on, or I get angry and I'm like, you are going to school. I don't care what you say. The reaction and the response that I get from him will escalate, and it'll go on potentially for an hour. If I say to him, he says, Mum, I don't want to go to school today. And I say, okay, well, what subjects do you have today? And he'll say, and his worst subject's maths. And he'll say, I've got maths. I'll say, is that a good decision, do you think? Based on what we know and that you find it difficult. If you think it's a good idea to not go to school today, stay home. Doesn't worry me. And 10 times out of 10, Geordie will say, that's okay, Mum, I'll go. So we have to really start to understand how to talk to our children in a way that resonates with them. Now, Olivia is, and it's taken me a very long time to figure her out because she's not like me, but she's clearly so much like me, but she's not like me. Some would argue maybe. But Olivia needs an arm around her. Olivia needs time. I need to spend time with her. And usually it's at 11 o'clock at night when I'm trying to prioritize my sleep that she'll be saying, can you just sit with me? Can we talk? I really, really think that giving kids your time, and it's not necessarily hours and hours and hours. She will sit in her room, she'll talk to her friends, she'll come out, she'll eat something, she'll do some homework, but there'll come a time where she'll be like, Mum, can I talk to you? And she needs to download. That's when she feels ready to do that. I know this about her, and it has been a real game changer to just carve out the time, knowing that when I want to go to bed, I need to actually go and check on her just before I go to bed at the time I want to go to bed. So this tends to work for both of us now. If I go in there at 10 o'clock and I'll say, I'm going to go to bed soon, sweetie. Are you going to go to bed soon too? And she'll say, oh, Mum, Can I tell you something? Like it's actually predictable. It's great. So giving and understanding what your children actually need. I don't parent forcefully. I don't feel like that is what works for us. Everybody's different. I had a lot of rules growing up. I don't like rules. I would like to say I'm here to break rules. And so having rules felt like I was constantly doing the wrong thing. And as a teenager, it's hard enough as it is without feeling like you're constantly doing the wrong thing. So it's hard enough without constantly feeling like you're doing the wrong thing. So I think that's actually very important for us to adjust how we're approaching things, because we're very good at telling our teenagers what they're doing wrong. We're very good at telling them what they shouldn't do. We're very good at setting up an expectation for them to fail. Are you expecting your teenager to be not nice? Are you expecting your teenager to answer back? Well, they do that anyway, but that's okay. Are you expecting your teenager to break the rules? What are you expecting? Because we often get what we expect, right? So for me, I was very determined with Olivia to not have that. I wanted the teen years to be the best years. I want the teen years to be the best years. They are amazing, and you don't have them in your house for forever. So I know I'm getting to the health part of it, but this part is all part of the reason why we see our teenagers' hormones shift, because they've got stresses that take hormones offline or rob from hormones, and then that has a flow-on effect to the symptoms that are presented to us. Heavy periods, painful periods, mood swings, you name it. The other thing is also understanding teenagers a little bit more. They are smarter than we give them credit for. This generation, they're socially aware. They actually want to do well. In my experience, they're not quite like we were as teenagers. I haven't seen that. And I'm sure there are some there. And what were we like? We didn't have phones for starters. Well, we did. I had a phone, but no one knew where I was. No one was tracking me. We didn't have social media. They've got a lot of things that they have to navigate that we didn't have that add extra layers of pressure. And then us putting pressure on them as well when we're supposed to be home base, that can add to the whole mix of things. So no matter where your teen's symptoms are presenting and what they're presenting, it all comes back to looking at these foundational pieces. It all comes back to looking at where is their stress, what is their, how are we dialing in nutrition? Sleep is another obviously really big factor. And what we also need to understand is as they go through puberty, their needs change, their circadian rhythm changes, and it actually shifts 2 hours later than ours in terms of when they are wanting to sleep and when they're wanting to wake, which if you don't know that can be so frustrating because you're up bright and early, 7 o'clock, you're up perky penny, and they're down there and they're sleeping until 10, 11 o'clock on the holidays or on the weekends, and you're frustrated. You're like, what is wrong with you? Get up. There's things to do. Where in actual fact, their circadian rhythm has changed and it's shifted later, and we should absolutely let teens sleep. Absolutely let teens sleep for sure. So just even knowing things like that means you can understand why they do what they do, and you can give them a little bit more grace. And also if they sleep at the right time, they're less grumpy, they're happier, they're healthier, their hormones are reflecting that too. And so that's something else I think that becomes really, really important. All right, let's dive into some of these questions now that I've rambled on. There's been a few questions about teens and sport and athletes. And obviously when there is a lot of exercise, it can absolutely take the hormones offline or impact ovulation. So it's about finding a happy medium, I think. If you're finding that your teenager is competing in high-level sport and they don't have a period, you have to look at making sure that a lot of the other things are dialed in: nutrition, sleep, stress levels, that we've spoken about all of these things, and even any trauma that there might have been from younger years that also needs to probably be addressed. The sooner we can address things like that, the better. And I'm not talking about talk therapy either, by the way. I'm talking about my favorite is psychotherapy. We've talked about that before on the podcast, and I'm keen to keep talking about it because I actually think it's one of the best things that we can do in terms of changing our beliefs and really helping us to process trauma or past thoughts, feelings, and beliefs about ourselves that are holding us back or keeping us sick. I think that, really looking at if their hormones are being taken offline, what do we need to do? Do we need to eat more? Do we need to put more fat and protein in the diet? Hormones are made of fat and protein. So if you are finding that that's an issue, making sure that we are increasing fat and protein. There's not a supplement as such. You can supplement things, but I think that the problem here is that they are very active, and that is just your body doing what it's supposed to in the circumstances. It can't do all the things if it doesn't have everything it needs. So just addressing that, I think, and being aware of that and seeing also what happens on a downtime, like off-season, school holidays, does a period come back, then you can definitely know that that's part of the challenge, and then scaffolding around that with those other lifestyle factors that we've spoken about. Okay. Periods, heavy, irregular, isn't normal. What can help that isn't medication, and when to reach out for help? Doctor suggests going on the pill for a few months to correct. Fortunately, the pill doesn't do that. In fact, if there is already heavy irregular periods, it's a sure sign that there's some other challenges. So whilst the pill the pill just flatlines hormones, right? And then you stop taking it for the, 7 days of the sugar pills. So your body withdraws from the hormones, you bleed, and then you go back on it again. But what it's doing is it's disrupting this maturation of hormones. So there is evidence to suggest that the later a teenager starts on birth control, the less problematic it is to their long-term hormone health. And that would be after the age of 21 because of that axis and the maturation that I spoke about being developed. So I would suggest that we look at, okay, well, why is the period heavy? Normally the period would be heavy when we have too much estrogen in the body, or the body isn't detoxifying estrogen properly. The liver detoxification is compromised. So I would be looking at that to help her, and you should absolutely be looking at the reasons why. Also, it doesn't say here that it's painful, but it is irregular. And that's the other tricky thing. An irregular period is very annoying because you don't know when it's going to happen, and it can be appealing to want to suppress it with birth control, but it doesn't actually solve the problem long term. So we could look at those things. Hormonal acne is another big one. I often find, yes, okay, it's hormonal. How do we know that the hormones are the reason that we're seeing acne? It's because you tend to, two reasons actually. You tend to see it along the jaw or the neck, and it's cyclic. So it's worse usually at ovulation or the period time, and then it kind of comes down, then it comes back. That's how we know it's hormonal. But you can have acne in other places and it worsen at those times as well in response to the changing hormones. So I would say, I always say this, and it's different this is a general sense we're talking here, right? Make sure your teenager's going to the toilet every day, because that's how we get rid of toxins. That's how we eliminate excess hormones. And if we're not moving them out of the bowel, we're reabsorbing them and they're becoming a problem. So bowels are the first thing. Using a good probiotic can be very important. The gut and the skin are one and the same. So if the gut's compromised, the skin will be compromised. So adding in a very gentle, and less is more, but a probiotic and having that daily will also, I think, is a great thing that you can start to do. Be mindful of what you're using topically. Remember, we wanted to strip our skin. We wanted to use the products that we used as teenagers. Horrendous if you think about it. When you strip the skin, you're going to make more oil to make up for the fact. Yes, that's just what your skin's going to do. So you're going to end up making it worse. So using appropriate products for teen skin, I think, is very important as well. They definitely don't need the level of products that we need, but they do need to keep their skin clean. And obviously a lot of them are loving using the makeup. So making sure we're washing that off. Can't tell you how many kids don't wash their face, and that's terrible as well. I would start with those things. This question says, acne for teen girls when you've tried all the nutritional supplements and interventions and not much improvement, and perhaps how to navigate teen bitch mode. We've talked a little bit about the teen bitch mode, but we've now just touched on acne a little bit. Teens are not great at taking supplements, let's be honest. I think this is where we have to really educate and really bring in this nutrition piece. And it's not about, again, it's about what you're putting in front of them. It's about what you're cooking. They're going to make decisions. They're going to buy Mars bars. But to that point, and this is what I wanted to revisit before, Olivia went through a phase where she was having quite terrible periods. And I said to her, you realize it's such a reflection. In this instance, it's a reflection of what do you eat? It's sugar. I said, it's really, you're probably eating too much sugar. And I discovered that she was on her way home from school often. She was getting a Mars bar on the way home from school. Now, we don't even eat Mars bars in this household. So where she discovered that, I mean, don't get me wrong. Look, it's like a whole lot of gooey goodness, but we don't eat them. And so I said to her, okay, so that's a lot of sugar. And really is a sometimes food, like not an everyday food, that's for sure. And if you start to eat it every day, you're going to start to notice that your skin's breaking out. You probably notice your periods might change and they're going to be painful. So anyway, I never forget we were talking to somebody and they were asking me questions about their teenagers' period pain. And Olivia said, she was like, this is a few years ago now. She said, oh, you should tell her not to eat Mars bars because they'll make you have period pain. I was like, it's not the Mars bar, it's the ingredients in the Mars bar, the sugar, the processed ingredients, the genetically modified ingredients. There's probably all sorts of things in there that are doing, not probably, there are all sorts of things in there that are not doing any favors. So really being mindful and educating them, being able to connect. This month you've indulged in these things and your period has been worse or your skin has been worse. We need to help them draw the correlation so that they can actually feel like, okay, maybe mum's right, maybe she's wrong. And just experiment. I would say, okay, next month, let's just not have, I know it's a big ask, but let's not have any and just see what happens. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. And of course I wasn't wrong. Got a lot of questions about moods. I think one of the best things that we can do is it is a stressful time and stress will absolutely take away from feel-good hormones and especially also can have an impact on progesterone as well. And without enough of that, you don't feel that great. And we definitely see things like PMS and mood swings. I think the nice thing is once your teenager gets their cycle, you can predict the more moody phases, usually in the lead up to the period. Whereas pre-teen or pre-puberty, the moods are all over the place. There's no rhyme or reason to it. You don't even know what you're going to get on any given day because their hormones are all over the place. Whereas now we're starting to establish patterns and that works in your favor. So magnesium, I would say, is a very useful thing and it will also help with high stress. It'll help with sleep. It'll help with period pain. So magnesium as a supplement can be also very useful as well. Oh, girls who are struggling with hormone fluctuations and heavy periods, also healthy eating. I can't monitor everything my teen eats. I just have to get at least one meal a day into them that's healthy. Great observation. One meal a day that's healthy. That's our job because we're not necessarily around for the other things that they're eating. But I also often will say to my kids in the morning as they leave, bye, I love you, make good choices. As they leave, just plant that little seed, so that hopefully they're in the canteen line and they're like, make good choices. But we've already sort of touched on this, we can only do our best. I really do think we can only do our best and we can't control all of it. And controlling all of it is not teaching them either, but connecting their symptoms with their lifestyle is going to be the thing I think that helps a lot more. I think that's the majority of the questions. No, there's actually more here. What are we? We touched on precocious puberty. And a lot of you, actually, I will just say this before we wrap. A lot of you asked me about how they can learn before they start going through the teen years. And I love this. And I know we touched on this, but I just want to say, I love how many of you were saying, my daughter's 4, my daughter's 7, my daughter's 9. I just want all the information I can to really start to pave a way so that we don't have to, or she doesn't have to experience what I went through. And you're right. You can do different things so that your children's path doesn't necessarily look like yours. Genetically, they're likely predisposed to whatever presentations you have. Endometriosis, adenomyosis, PCOS. If you have one of these diagnosed, then this is even more of a reason to make sure that you're educating, make sure that you're doing the right thing. And it might be also useful to take your teenager at the time off to see somebody who can help speak reason as well. I speak to teens all the time with mothers, and I just help them to understand, because mum has PCOS, these are the things we want to do to scaffold so that we can make sure that we do as much as we can so that that doesn't present for you. Now, genetically, there's a good chance that it will present if you do all the wrong things. If you activate all the triggers, you're going to get, that's a given. But if we can actually make sure that the triggers are never activated, then there's no reason that will ever present. And I see that time and time again. So for those of you who that speaks to, this is where I think it can be really good to sit with someone. You only need one appointment. They can, in our clinic, we'd map that all out for you and give you a plan so that you knew the things to do. But you are more of an influence than you realize. You have more control than you think without being controlling. It's all in the energy that you put out there for your children. It's all in the way that you show up. It's in how you listen. And don't get me wrong, guys. I don't have all the answers here. I can just tell you what's been working so far. Olivia turns 17 and I feel like we're really in it. We're really in it. The other thing I will say just before we go, and this can be really hard, but also friends are a big influence on our teenagers. Who they spend their time with. We become who we spend our time with. And I remember saying to my kids very early on when they started asking to do things that were not something that we did in this house, I remember saying to them this: you can make your life really pleasant and much easier, or you can make it feel like you're constantly meeting resistance based on who you're spending time with and what you're asking to do. If you're asking to do things constantly that you know that we don't do, then the answer is always going to be no. But if you can find people that are like you, that are like us, that do similar things, that have similar thoughts and beliefs, then the answer is going to be yes more than no. So make your job easy. Find people that you know, because they know who the good influences and the bad influences are. No one's bad, but who the good influences are and who the cheeky ones are, right? I'm like, you go and find the people out there that are like you, that are like us, and life will be easier. And it's not to say they shouldn't ask. It's not to say they don't go through the challenges and have to learn how to navigate different people and friendships. And I'm all about that. I'm like, you've got to do the hard work sometimes, guys. But I really do think that a big part of it is who they're spending their time with, because they've got two major influences then. What happens at home and what happens when they're not at home, what happens when they're at school or when they're with their peers. So that's the other thing I've really encouraged with my kids, and then I educate my kids and then they talk to their friends about it, and it becomes something that's just energy exchange, right? It's just where things flow. So I do hope that this has been helpful. It's literally 45 minutes of me rambling about puberty. There is always more you can do, right? Some of you will be listening going, but what about this? But what about that? There's always more you can do, but this is foundational. These are the things that I see often aren't happening, and that we're asking ourselves, why are our teenagers being this way? Why are the periods like this? Why is this happening? I think the main thing is that we need to get very clear on the examples that we're setting, the foundations that we're laying, and the influence that has. And then from there, we can start to navigate, because that really does have the biggest impact on how our bodies do actually behave. So yes, I do hope that this has been enjoyable. I would love it if you went ahead and, of course, tell me what you think about the episode. Please rate the podcast. I would forever love you for that. That would be really great. And if you know that there's someone that's struggling, that has a teenager, that maybe just needs to hear a few different things, go ahead and feel free to share this episode around. Share the love. I love that so much for us. We'll be back next time with another episode. But until then, I am going to say bye.